Check, check.
Hello. If you're watching this, you already know that climate change isn't a hoax, it's not overblown, it's not alarmist, and it's not something that's going to happen far in the future or somewhere far away from you. It's happening now, it's happening everywhere, and it's happening to you. Forest fires are raging, the summer is very hot. Crops are failing, global powers are for some reason still picking wars over oil. Emissions are rising, temperatures are going up, and you probably feel some type of way about it, which is why you're watching this video. So that's why I wanted to make a very chill, very relaxing 2-hour video. This is not going to be very well edited. I just have a bunch of notes here, and I just wanted to hang out and tell you about climate solutions for 2 hours straight. Here's the other thing. The tides are turning. The shift is happening. It's just not as widely talked about, and honestly, I think I know why it's not as widely talked about. But allow me to take a sip of my tea out of my Oil Executive Tears mug. And I think the more people talk about it, the faster it'll happen. So, chill out, take a walk, get some tea, start some laundry. I'm drinking hojicha. Tuck in for a nap, whatever, as I tell you about how we're starting to win and how we're not cooked yet. Now, I wanted to make this video because I know everybody wants to be on the winning team. Like, I'm such a bandwagoner. I lived in Edmonton for 10 years, and the only time I'm paying attention to the Oilers is when they're winning. The only time I'm rooting for the Oilers is when they've made it to Game 7. You know, you're not going to the sports bar unless it's the semifinals, right? Well, this is Game 7. This is the semifinals. I don't know what semifinals are. I don't pay attention to sports. Is that what it is? We're the underdogs, and honestly, I want you to be a bandwagoner because unlike sports, rooting for the team actually helps it win. But to start, before I get on with this, obviously I don't want to make this video so that you go, oh, okay, everything's fine. I'm not going to worry about it anymore. I'm not going to do anything. No. You have to do something about it. We all have to do something about it. We just can't concede the battle yet. So to start, I want you to know you are not powerless. You have at least 3 important things. A basic understanding of climate change and its solutions. You speak at least some English, unfortunately very important, and you have internet access. So those 3 things are very important. With those 3 things, you can do a lot. So let's get on with the solutions. To start off with, what green premium? Solar and wind, you have this idea, oh, sure, we could switch over to it, but it's going to be expensive. Well, guess what? We live on a planet. To quote Bill Mckibben's incredible new book, Here Comes the Sun, we live on a planet where the cheapest way to produce power is to point a sheet of glass at the sun, and the second cheapest is to let the breeze created by the sun's warmth turn the blade of a wind turbine. And if you're aware of how much has to change in order for us to stop climate change, you're probably thinking, okay, well, that's just a techno fix. That's not going to overhaul the system. Well, it might. In Here Comes the Sun, Bill Mckibben, noted climate alarmist, been saying we're fucked for 20 years, wrote a book called The End of Nature. He's very optimistic. He says that it's not just about swapping out one technology for another, dirty for clean, but the energy that we use has always prefigured the society we live in. You know, when we had to chop down trees for energy, feudalism or communalism. Coal comes along, bam, now we have capitalism. Now we have the Industrial Revolution, which of course had many benefits, but also, like, you've read your Dickens. You know about the horrible workhouses, factories, inequalities that marked early capitalism. And then we switched over to oil and gas. And they lend themselves very well to specifically tyrannical petrostates. A petrostate is 50% more likely to be authoritarian. And, you know, oil-soaked turbo neoliberalism, deregulate everything, but also give billions of dollars to fossil fuel companies. That's the kind of world that is prefigured by the use of fossil fuels. But abundant and equitable power could lead to a more equitable society if we make it happen. Solar and wind don't get more expensive when a corrupt leader decides to, I don't know, artificially limit their supply, declare war for no fucking reason. Billionaires can't hoard them, and we don't gotta go to war to secure energy independence when it's just about pointing a glass and some metals at the sun. The Pentagon is responsible for more emissions than a lot of countries. And as we'll see in later chapters when I talk about renewables in historically colonized, low-income, quote-unquote, countries, anybody can point some glass and some metal at the sky and get free energy. If we pull off the renewable revolution, the era of eternal wars for oil and the vast inequality that comes from, like, a petrostate will come to an end with the transition. So it's not, oh, we have to do the economic transition before we can do the green transition. It's that we do them at the same time and they work together. Now, one thing I didn't like about Bill Gates's book, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster, is that he harped on and on about something called the green premium. That avoiding climate disaster is actually going to cost more, you guys, and we're just going to have to tighten our belts. Well, not Bill Gates, obviously. More like, we'll have to tighten our belts, and that's a sacrifice that Bill Gates is willing to make. You know, oh, it's worth it to save the planet, right? Okay, well, maybe that used to be the case, but it's not anymore. There's no green premium, but there is a fossil fuel premium, at least when it comes to electricity. Right now, the world spends $2 trillion per year on fossil fuel rents. So not on fossil fuels, just on rents. So that's a fancy economics word for basically the markup that petrostates or oil companies can charge on fossil fuels. So that's the money that goes from consumers to those that control the supply. It's what we pay to Saudi Arabia and Russia. And this $2 trillion going away is very good for almost every country because most countries are net importers of fossil fuels, not exporters. And us exporters, Canada, the US, Russia, Saudi Arabia, we're going to have to change our tunes if we want to stick with the time. We won't have those $2 trillion in rents anymore. Another estimate from Oxford says that a rapid transition to renewables saves the world $26 trillion. So let's talk about how incredibly solar is going so far, because it really is way faster than even I knew, and it's my job to know about this kind of thing. So let me point my books. You guys, look, I can read. So what I'm showing on the screen right now are a bunch of predictions about how quickly solar energy would grow. And let me tell you, every single one of them was wrong. The total is so much higher. I mean, when you're looking at it, it's essentially a vertical line. On average, the actual solar that was installed is 3 times as high as the 5-year predictions. This is what we call an S-curve and is going to be very important for basically this entire video. But that's how we get it done. It's not small incremental change. It's a revolution that happens all at once, and right now it's happening with clean energy. It just might not seem like it if you live in the US or Canada. So to give you some more perspective on this, it took from 1954 to 2022, 70 years to put up the first terawatt of solar. So a terawatt is essentially, it could power like a country or a continent. Right now, our peak power demand is 3 terawatts. So it took 70 years to put up the first terawatt. And I mean, that's a lot of power, clearly. So 70 years isn't crazy. It took 2 years to put up the second terawatt. And the third terawatt is probably going to happen sometime this year. So that, however fast you think it's happening, it's faster. That's what S-curve means. A similar statistic is true for how fast wind is going up. It took 40 years for the first terawatt of wind, and the second terawatt is predicted to come up by 2029-ish. It is so much more efficient to use solar than any other fuel. To quote the Here Comes the Sun book, burning gas to light a room creates more heat than light. Burning coal to create electricity creates more heat than electricity. Burning oil to move a vehicle creates more heat than motion. We are sending more energy up smokestacks and out exhaust pipes than we are putting up to work for our economy. And I forgot to mention one more thing, the incredible solar savings. Solar, wind, and batteries have gotten so cheap, it's actually crazy. While the price of coal, oil, and gas has either stayed the same for the last few decades or, because of Strait of Hormuz, shot up. Unfortunately, also nuclear is not getting any cheaper, but the cratering costs of clean energy. Since 2010, which is 16 years ago, I know, solar costs have gone down 90%. Onshore wind has gone down by 70%. And battery storage has gone down by 95%. I want to ask you something. When's the last time anything went down in price other than like shitty smart TVs and fast fashion t-shirts? Never? When's the last time something got 90% cheaper? Never. This was solar in 2010. This is her today. Feel old yet? Anyway, renewable electricity from new wind and solar projects is now cheaper than the power from newly built coal or gas plants in almost every market worldwide, as I've been saying before, but it bears repeating. It literally makes more economic sense to do that. And we can see that that's happening, but there's also a reason it's not taking off as fast as it should, which is really saying something because it is taking off fast. But it could be taking off faster, but vested oil and gas interests have lobbied governments around the world to prevent solar and wind projects from going up. It's happened in Alberta. It's happened in lots of places in the US. Bummer. But if you look at private land that can't be regulated like that, it is 90% of the new power capacity added in 2025. So this is not a let the market do its thing type of a situation. We do need governments to do something about it, but also like let the market do its thing, and that you're preventing the cheaper option. What the fuck? I don't know. Danielle Smith has got Adam Smith rolling in his grave. To continue to throw numbers at you to help you wrap your head around how fast this is happening, in 2023, we were putting up 1 gigawatt of solar per day. In the fall of 2024, that was every 18 hours. Most of this is happening in China, but it's also happening like here in North America. California in 2024 used, okay, so this is going to be a little hard to explain. Bear with me. In 2024, California used 25% less natural gas than 2023. They cut a quarter of their natural gas use off. But by 2025, it was 44% less than in 2023. So between 2023 and 2025, they cut nearly half of their natural gas usage. Why? I'm glad you asked, because they're using solar. This year, renewables actually overtook coal as an energy source. But you ask, isn't clean energy also going to require a ton of mining and a ton of minerals and metals? Aren't we going to run out of minerals and metals? Well, first of all, there's two questions here. Number one, can we get enough stuff? Minerals, metals, whatever. Second of all, how can we do it without absolutely screwing over the global south? Well, I'll answer the first one first. We will not run out of minerals. In 2023 paper in Joule looked at 75 different scenarios for a green energy transition and ran the numbers on 15 minerals. Foremost, demand through 2050 amounts to 15% of global reserves. We will not run out of minerals before the transition is complete. All of the refined metals that we will need to reach net zero by 2050 add up to less than the amount of coal mined in 2023 alone. In 1 year, we dug up more coal than the metals that we would need. So overall, to get these minerals, to get these metals, it is so much less mining than we have to do already to get coal and stuff that it's just mind-blowing. And like, I think the reason people get this wrong is because you think, oh, you have to get the metals in order to get the energy, just like you have to mine the coal in order to get the energy. But when you mine the metals, you have the energy forever, or at least for a very long time. Maybe you have to do a little bit of recycling, a little bit of fixing them up. Whereas you have the coal, you burn it, and then it's gone. You have the oil and you burn it and then it's gone. You gotta get more. But what if the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow? Well, I have some good news for you. Batteries are, to put it as the scientists would say, going fucking bananas right now. So, and it's not just the batteries that you need metals and scarce minerals for, which I will get into why it's probably not as big of a deal as you think it is to get all of those metals and scarce minerals, but you don't even need them to make the kinds of batteries people are putting up now. So in Finland, this one company is converting a disused copper mine into a gravity battery. And I know this sounds like a weird techno fix kind of thing, but it is very cool and it is extremely scalable, which is what I care about. So during the day, Excess Renewables will hoist a platform piled with tons of rock up a 530-meter shaft. And at night, the platform will slowly lower, driving a turbine to release all of the energy that it's stored up by pushing up gravity battery. It's incredibly efficient, has a very tiny and sustainable bill of materials, and is very replicable, which is what I care about. Can it be scaled up? The world apparently has sufficient abandoned mine shafts to store 70 terawatt hours of power. That's the daily energy budget of the entire planet. What's more, every mine shaft is already super wired up to the power grid. You don't have to create this beefy connection to the power grid. It already exists because you can't run a mine without lots of power. So if you have an abandoned mine, it's probably already hooked the fuck up. But what about the normal batteries that you need lots of minerals for? Well, the chemistry of batteries is rapidly improving. Over the past decade, we've reduced per usage demand for lithium, nickel, and cobalt by between 60 and 140%. Most lithium batteries are in fact recycled, not landfilled. Within the next 10 years, we will likely hit peak mineral demand for batteries. So that means that the amount of new quote unquote virgin materials is going to stop growing and start declining as we first recycle stuff and improve our technology. By 2050, if we get good enough at recycling, we could attain net zero mineral demand for batteries. We would not need to mine anymore in the next few decades. Already the batteries that we build work for 10 to 15 years, and their materials are recycled with 90 to 94% efficiency. Think of those tiny tote bags that are like, this is made out of 100 plastic water bottles. Imagine if it was nearly a 1-to-1 ratio between recycled bag and recycled bag. I don't know if that makes any sense, but there's almost nothing materially that you can recycle to make a 1-to-1 version of. I'll just say that. And all the refined metals needed to reach net zero by 2050 will add up to less than the amount of coal mined in 2023 alone. The total quantity of minerals, I'm just going to keep rattling off facts to you. These are all facts that say, yes, we are going to need to mine a lot of stuff, but compared to the amount of fossil fuels that we are already mining, and compared to how long these batteries are going to last and how well you can recycle them, it's really, really not as big of a deal as it sounds. Now, the total quantity of minerals we will need to extract to permanently satisfy the world's energy storage, so batteries, is about 125 million tons. That sounds like a lot. But let me put this into perspective. This comes courtesy of Cory Doctorow. It is 1/17 the amount of fossil fuels we dig up every year just for road transport, just to make car go. It would extract 5.8% of the materials that we currently pump and dig every year just for cars, just to burn in cars. Do that and we satisfy our battery needs more or less forever. So let me just rephrase this one more time, because I know numbers don't quite work as well when you're hearing them as when you're reading them. But if you take 1/17 of all of the oil and gas that we are digging up to put into cars to burn, that is the equivalent amount of materials we would need to pump to dig up to make our batteries. So, we're going to have to mine the entire world for batteries. No, we are already mining the entire world for fossil fuels. We would have to mine a significantly smaller amount of the world in order to get batteries. The recycling is going incredibly well. The chemistry of batteries is rapidly improving. Over the past decade, we've reduced per usage demand for lithium, nickel, and cobalt by 60 to 140%. And most lithium batteries are, in fact, being recycled, not landfilled, except for your vape battery. Yes, the silver used in one solar panel built in 2010 would be around enough for 5 solar panels today. So we're not going to need more silver. We are going to be more efficient with it, and our recycling is like, usually when you recycle a bottle, you get like a little bit of plastic out of it maybe. You get 5 times as many solar panels from recycling that silver. Now, on to the people who are made to mine these metals and minerals. What about them? Won't the green transition only benefit those of us in rich countries? I think we need to be very, very careful not to be like, okay, green transition for me up in a rich country, and more extractivism and energy poverty and colonialism for thee. But, as I said up top, I do think that solar and wind lend themselves well to an anti-colonial system. And, like I said also, most low-income countries are importers of fossil fuels unless they happen to be one of the ones that has oil, and then the US has probably already done a coup on them. So, either way, better for them to have the renewable revolution as well. And yes, it can feel a little hypocritical to be like, well, this kind of mining is good, so it's okay that the conditions are terrible. Unfortunately, that is how everything gets mined under extractive capitalism, but as I just said, we are mining a lot less of it. Hopefully, a solar and wind-powered world of equitable access to energy can get us out of this extractive imperial death spiral that we're in. So let me also tell you about how renewables are specifically benefiting historically plundered, low-income, quote-unquote, countries. I will say low income because it's descriptive, but I'm not blaming them or anything. Like, there is no such thing as a poor country. There are just countries that got robbed. The sun works better near the equator. There is more sun near the equator, which is where a lot of global south low-income countries are. Renewables are growing twice as fast in the global south. For example, Uruguay got 10 months of 100% renewables in 1 year. Diesel sales in Pakistan fell by 30% in just 1 year in 2024 because they got replaced with what? Chinese solar panels. Namibia has 70 megawatts of distributed generation, which is 11%. Eswatini, it's 15%. And what's happening isn't the government is going, hey, here's some solar panels. Hey, here's some incentives for solar panels. They're just buying them from China and putting them up like in their houses or on their farms. And I read this great anecdote from the Here Comes the Sun book about they're not paying extra for like the brackets to mount them to their houses or anything. They are putting them flat on the ground and soaking up the sun, and it works just as well. So I just thought that was nice. In countries, in like Caribbean countries, replacing fossil fuels would drop energy costs to a fifth of what they were if they're using oil and gas, because these countries are fossil fuel importers and they have to pay a premium. I know here in Canada, what we hear a lot is, oh, countries are asking for natural gas. They need our natural gas, you guys. We need to help them out of energy poverty, and we need to, help them power their generators or whatever. But like, if we really cared, guys, if we really cared, we'd be sending them solar panels. But no, that's clearly not what this is about. We're just saying shit. Anyways, Rajiv Shah, in his guest essay on the New York Times, said if you want to solve poverty, focus on one thing and one thing only. To quote the article, access to electricity determines fundamental aspects of individual lives, like whether you're healthy, whether you have a job, but improvised solar panels, batteries, and other breakthroughs have now made it far easier to provide reliable, clean electrification for everyone. If you want to end poverty, focus on only this. Not even energy poverty, just poverty. So there is this concept of the fossil fuel, detour. There's this concept of a fossil fuel detour where as countries industrialize, they will go from biofuels, so wood basically, to coal, to fossil fuels, to clean energy. That's like supposed to be the system. But in countries like India and to a lesser extent China, they are just skipping the coal and the fossil fuel session. Less so China, but India is using far less fossil fuels than other countries did at that same stage of development. They're just skipping straight over to electrification and solar power. Obviously they're not mostly run by renewables yet, but they are skipping the whole detour. They are electrifying fast, literally because it saves money and it saves lives by improving air quality. India has also 99% electrified trains, as I saw in one YouTube comment. So there's this idea that, low-income countries have to emit more in order to develop. But like, what about India and China? Those arguments just don't really hold up. And of course, but solar panels cost a lot to install off the jump is still a valid argument. But now we are starting to develop balcony solar, which is you don't have to pay some guy to put it on your roof. You just hang it out like a rug, and it's going crazy this summer. It's so popular. In Germany, it's very popular. 430,000 new plug-in balcony solars were installed in 2025, except it's probably way, way more because there are probably a lot of people that didn't register them with the government. It's being legalized in blue states. It's not legal here for some reason. Hey guys, write your MPs, write your MLAs. I want to plug in a solar panel. And in California, if you install one of these, you can save $560 a year in energy costs. So for industrial processes that are hard to electrify, well, it is estimated that most industrial processes that use heat on this continent could be replaced with electricity by 2035. Now, much like owning a home versus renting, I would say that fossil fuels are like renting a house. It's cheaper, but you have to keep burning money every single month by giving it to your landlord, where the landlord here, I guess, is like ExxonMobil. Renewables is more like owning your house. Like, yes, you have to pay a lot up front, but if you can pay that, it pays itself back very, very quickly. Now, the problem is how to pay for the initial down payment on your clean green house. Well, here's some suggestions just off the top. We got a 2% wealth tax would take in $480 billion. A tiny tax on financial transactions like buying stock could bring in $330 billion. And if we just stopped subsidizing fossil fuels, if we stopped handing taxpayer money to fossil fuels, which sometimes they do because they're like, oh, we need to make gas more affordable for people. If we just made electricity more affordable for people instead, that would save us, $270 billion. So it's very doable. How about the land? Oh, solar panels take up a lot of land. Oh, those ugly solar panel farms. I actually think they're very nice, but fossil fuel infrastructure already takes up 1.3% of American land. And replacing it with clean energy would take up much, much less of the landscape. And what about biofuel, which takes up so much space. If you're not familiar, biofuel is basically you grow a bunch of corn and then you turn it into biofuel and then you burn it in a car or something. It's probably not that great of an understanding of it, but biofuel, all of that corn, is only 1 to 3% efficient in turning the sun into energy, which is it's basically an extremely inefficient solar panel because it takes the sun, puts it in the corn, turns it into energy, and then we feed it to cars. So really, covering 3% of the land that's currently used for biofuel in solar that would be enough. Many farmers have been known to actually plant their crops interspersed amongst the solar panels because the solar panels provide shade, and since the summers are getting hotter, we're going to need that in order to grow stuff, and the farmers make a lot more money by selling that solar energy, so it's a win-win-win. So I'm just now realizing that my mic was off for a lot of this, but I'm not going to re-record it because I'm trying to get this out quickly for everybody going through the wildfires and the heat waves and everything. So you know what? It's lo-fi climate solutions to relax to. Okay, one thing I would like to add is, remember when earlier I said autocrats can't hoard the sun? Well, there is a real life example of that happening right now. The US is blockading energy to Cuba and intimidating other countries to do the same, and Cuba is having a very hard time of it. The US is even threatening to annex Cuba. What else is new? And in response, Cuba is, quote, pulling off one of the fastest solar revolutions on the planet. With imported solar panels from China and Chinese investment, Cuba has built dozens of solar parks. So the grid right now can't replace all of the fossil fuels that are being used in Cuba, but for energy crisis is a real crisis. I'm not like solar is going to solve everything immediately, but Cuba has installed 1 gigawatt of solar over the last year, and right now 10% of its energy is solar, but a lot of that is just from the last year. A lot of that is since the Trump embargo. And all of this solar is already solving lots of problems for average people. So for example, in Santa Clara, there's a charging center where people can charge anything from phones to power banks to electric motorbikes. One think tank estimated that the complete transition to clean energy in Cuba would likely cost $8 billion, which is a lot, and they're going to have to finance that from rich countries, and rich countries step it up. But to put that into perspective, Cuba's GDP is estimated to be around $80 to $100 billion. So $8 billion would be about 10% of that. This is also an important lesson for other countries to learn right now, because like you might suddenly just get embargoed by the US because they want to fucking annex you. And you know, pulling off a renewable transition in the midst of an energy crisis where you can't even power your hospitals, that's really difficult. I believe that Cuba can do it. But other countries, I hope, look at this and go, oh, energy sovereignty is important, and we can achieve energy sovereignty much faster through renewables. Oh, what if the US decides to pick on us next? Well, they won't be able to if we electrify everything. We better get going on that green transition before some demagogue decides he doesn't like the cut of our jib and starves us. If Cuba can do it, which I believe they can, it should inspire smaller, more vulnerable countries to be like, we should probably get our energy from something that can't be embargoed, like the sun. Folks, the time is now. Now, it does seem kind of daunting, the idea of we need to overhaul all of our infrastructure. But I want to remind you that we changed the entire face of the planet for cars, and it only took us a few decades, and there was no ticking time bomb. We weren't even in a hurry. We were just like, oh yes, let's rip up the entire face of the earth and replace it with cement so we can get places faster. Not to save the earth or anything. So to quote an incredible essay from Reuben Sloan, "There's room for everybody," cars are a fruitful analogy for infrastructural change because they transform the world. It's urban fabric, it's geopolitical balance, it's cuisines, handhold cuisines, burgers and stuff that you eat in your car, so completely in a single short century. Did people at the dawn of the automobile say, "Are you kidding me? This technology will require a ubiquitous network of refueling stations, 1 or 2 at every major intersection. And even if there was that much gas in the world, how would you move it around at scale? Everybody buys a car, you'd need to build highways, you'd need to dig up cities. You can't do that." Maybe they did say those things. It was madness. Skeptics of solar feasibility pantomime a kind of technical reality, but I think the real technical people go, oh, we're going to rip out and replace the plumbing of human life on this planet? Right, we just did that. I remember that from last time. Let's go. Except for, obviously, digging up our entire planet for cars was not a good move, and this one is more or less undoing that mistake. But as we'll see pretty soon, it's not as hard as it sounds to replace our entire cities with better, more walkable, bikeable, busable cities, just with a few small tweaks to policy and to urban planning you'll see later.
But Hazel, It won't work because of Jevons paradox. Hank Green said you need to know about it.
Ah, yes, thank you. Everybody, this is Strawman. I argue with him a lot in my head, so I decided to give him a corporeal form. Thank you, Strawman. You're probably talking about Jevons paradox, which states that improving efficiency for something will actually increase how much it gets used. Like, improving coal efficiency means more coal gets built, or improving car efficiency means we drive more cars. Well, or apparently increasing AI efficiency means more AI use.
Once there's more solar and wind, won't people just use more energy? I mean, fossil fuel use is still increasing, isn't it?
Now, Strawman, you have a good point, but the Jevons paradox is more about one specific resource. With clean energy, we're changing the resource that we're using. Like, adding bike lanes isn't going to increase car traffic because they're different kinds of lanes. Inventing cars didn't increase horse use. Solar and wind are completely different types of energy, so it's not quite the same thing. And sure, in the overall world at large, fossil fuels are still increasing and renewables are just on top of them. But in places that have been early to the green transition, like the EU, they're seeing clean energy genuinely replacing oil and gas and not just, like, sitting on top of it. Are you happy?
What about all the stuff we use?
Well, you're right about that, but luckily there's a study. So moving on to my next topic. Jason Hickel has a study that shows that humanity can live comfortably with a 70% reduction in energy use. So this is from a paper, How Much Growth is Required to Achieve Good Lives for All? Insights from Needs-Based Analysis. Provisioning decent living standards for 8.5 billion people would require only 30% of current global resources and energy use. It would just have to be spent more efficiently. And the benchmark he's using is not just like food and shelter and you have to eat bugs or whatever. It's higher order goods and services necessary for decent living standard. DLS is what this is short for. So nutritious food, modern housing, healthcare, education, electricity, clean cooking stoves. Clean cooking? Like they cook and it's clean. I thought it was a kind of stove that cleaned itself. Clean cooking stoves, sanitation systems, clothing, washing machines, refrigeration, heating, cooling, computers, mobile phones, internet, transit, etc., of which billions are already deprived. So just to make sure that nobody's confused here, because I know this is a lot of numbers, he's saying that if we took the total amount of stuff and energy that we use, we only really need to be using 30% of that. We only need to be using 1/3 of that to provide everybody with decent standards of living, a comfortable life. That is what this paper is saying. Good social indicators can be achieved with substantially less aggregate production than what characterizes today's high-income countries, this is a quote, which are highly inefficient at converting throughput and output into human well-being. So these guys estimate that approximately 14 to 21 gigajoules is what is required for a decent life, which is, again, 30% of what's going on per person, except for it is extremely badly shared. Now, I don't know if I fully buy 30%. That seems very low. But even if it's 50 and they just didn't account for a bunch of stuff, even if it's 70, it's still worth going for. So what do they say we need in order to do this huge reduction of energy use? We would need global deployment of efficient technology, so clean energy plus more efficient stuff, public provisioning / decommodification. So goods that are essential to decent living are produced and distributed not for a profit, but like through directly. A shift toward planet-heavy diets, public transit over private cars, and a scaling down of unnecessary production, SUVs, private jets, fast fashion, advertising, so on. And yes, less necessary production of things like, mansions, SUVs, private jets, fast fashion must be scaled down to enable faster decarbonization. So even if we do make a bunch of clean energy, at the rate we're consuming goods up here in rich countries, we will still probably have to consume less stuff overall. I mean, most of the stuff, it has to come from somewhere. It has to come from some resource. And honestly, usually that resource is plastic, which is made of petroleum, in case you didn't know. But even if it's not plastic, it's got to come from somewhere. Luckily, as many studies point out, buying and overconsumption do not really make us happy either. I have like 5 sources on this, and I didn't write them down because they all basically say the exact same shit. That the more, like, buying more stuff once you have decent living standards, DLS, it doesn't improve your well-being. Bad news. Sorry about the Sheehan Halls, guys. Oh, come back to nuclear. I don't want to do it yet. Now, I want to talk about jobs real quick. You might have heard the phrase, environmentalism without class struggle is just gardening. Well, like I said earlier, a fossil fueled economy prefigures, it requires a huge divide between rich and poor. I'm not going to get into the entire class struggle here. Like, yes, we will need to change our economy, but I'm trying to focus specifically on climate stuff. Anywho, environmentalists, we do need to care about workers, or we're just not going to fucking get anywhere, and everybody's going to hate us. Luckily, a green transition is also fantastic for workers. I mean, there's a lot of fucking work to do. We're gonna need workers to do it. So let me tell you the story. In the 1930s, as a response to the Great Depression and the unprecedented levels of inequality and unemployment, FDR implemented the New Deal, which included huge infrastructure overhauls, bridges and roads needed to be constructed, and somebody needed to do all of this building. So huge swaths of young unemployed men and some unemployed women signed up for FDR's Civilian Conservation Corps, which supplied manual labor jobs related to the conservation and development of natural resources in rural lands owned by federal, state, and local governments, and alleviated unemployment and helped, oh God, it is really getting dark in here. Oh well. Should I do terrible overhead light? How yellow do I look? Anywho, yes, I'm recording this at the very end of the day, so there's not much light left. That's okay, it's a cozy vibe. Now, the same amount of work needs to be done now, but and there's a lot of youth organizations pushing for civilian climate corps, and I bet there's a chance that we get civilian climate corps done unlike smaller jurisdictions like states or provinces or in smaller countries with less obstruction in the government. But under Carney's Canada and Trump's America, you're probably not going to get that on a federal scale. And yet, the opportunities for good paying jobs are still there. And we can have a very similar transformation of not just our infrastructure, but also our employment. Now, there's an argument you hear from people who are employed in like the oil and gas industry, especially here in Canada. They see people like me as trying to put them out of a job. Oh, you don't want me to have a good, lucrative job? We really don't. We want you to have a job. We want everybody to have a job who wants a job. And we want everybody who wants a job to have a job. We want that job to be safe and, pays well. In fact, working in the tar sands does sound like hell, like lucrative hell, but I've heard stories from Fort McMurray, okay? Luckily, already, with the world still hooked on fossils, by 2023 there were more jobs in clean energy than in fossil fuels in the entire world. It's growing 3 times as fast as the general job market. Wind turbine technician is the #1 fastest growing occupation in the US. Solar installer is #2 or #3 depending on the year. But who am I to tell people what jobs they can or can't have? Well, I want to tell you about a man named Donald Carlson who worked for Koch Industries' Pine Bend oil refinery in 1974. Bummer alert incoming. I'm sorry about this, but it's important to contrast these jobs. Donald was known for being a good worker. If the work was too hard, they'd give it to him, his wife said. He cleaned tanks, took samples, and was often exposed to toxic substances. Like many of the thousands of employees in the refinery, Carlson was often exposed to toxic substances. He was practically swimming in those tanks, his wife said, but Carlson never thought twice about it. I was a young guy. They didn't tell me anything, he explained later. He was never warned that benzene, which in 1928 already was known to cause cancer, so having this in the 70s is not an excuse, particularly leukemia. They were never told him that benzene was a threat to his health. And Koch Industries was also required by law to test all its employees for benzene levels, but between 1990 and 1994, they did not tell him that his exposure was ridiculously high. And by 1995, he was too sick to work, and he passed away. And Koch never paid workers' comp and never admitted to anything. The Koch brothers, the people who owned this and many other refineries, spent decades pushing for weaker safety regulations for workers. In 1980, David Koch of the Koch brothers ran for vice president on a libertarian ticket with a platform for abolishing OSHA. So that's the Occupational Safety, what does it stand for? OSHA. Occupational Safety and Health Administration. So specifically, he wanted to abolish occupational safety, along with the FDA, SEC, and EPA. He lost, but as a bajillionaire, his influence was enormous. According to the book Dark Money, one of the biggest reasons why the US has gotten so deregulated that people have like turbo diarrhea because we're not regulating the chemicals we put in farms anymore, and we're not tracking explosive diarrhea viruses anymore because that's been deregulated too. They were the reason that we started on this path, the Kochs, because, the more deregulation, the less we have to worry about our workers, the more money for us. This is the kind of world that we get in a world powered by fossil fuels. But in the US, coal is estimated to cause about 25 to 100 worker deaths per terawatt hour generated, Oil is around 18 to 36 people, and these are all just from slips and falls. Something like Donald's long illness wouldn't even count. Much higher a fatality rate than police or firefighters. Where's their thin, oily line? Meanwhile, solar is about 0.02 deaths, and nuclear and wind are both 0.04 deaths per terawatt hour. So, what would a world where more people are employed putting up solar and wind and efficient appliances look like? Probably less like the world that the Kochs pushed for. So far, clean energy workers make up 30% more than the national median wage. They also pay, on average, slightly more than coal, oil, and natural gas jobs. And I mean slightly, like I think one of them's $24.30, and then the cleaner ones are like $24.90. But you know what? A win is a win. The Urban Institute found renewable energy and green construction jobs, especially ones that didn't require a bachelor's degree, tend to be more likely to be unionized than other non-bachelor degree requiring jobs, especially in installation, maintenance and repair, construction, and extraction roles. The kind of thing that blue-collar trade work doesn't require, you to take on a ton of debt going to college just so that you can get that kind of a job. Those would be without college degrees. And the unionization amongst clean energy jobs, it leaves something to be desired. Just saying that it has higher union participation than average doesn't mean that that's good, because the bar is in fucking hell. But these jobs should and can be unionized. Now, moving on, I want to talk about the great air conditioner discourse of 2026, which some of the more sane states and governments are begging people to turn their AC down, for God's sake, to like 26 Celsius or like 77-ish Fahrenheit to avoid blackouts and to save energy. Now, as a Canadian who goes to America a lot for work, I find it insane when it's this like lovely, nice sunny day where I can wear shorts and a tank top, and then I walk into a frigid office and I'm freezing immediately and everybody's wearing like long sleeve button down shirts. What are we doing? It's barbaric to me, but y'all really seem to like your AC, so let's talk about it. Why is it 90 degrees and I have to bring a sweater to the office? Anyway, but like it or not, we are going to need to embrace central cooling because it's going to get hotter, and it's especially important for countries that currently don't have access to that kind of thing. So looks like we're going to need to find some kind of way that's not extremely energy hungry and polluting and doesn't cook the planet. Luckily, it already exists, and it has a very unintuitive name, heat pumps. Some people have said to call it like two-way air conditioner or whatever, but it is as good at cooling as it is at warming. Imagine if your air conditioner could also heat your house. Incredible. You might have heard that they don't stand up to truly frigid temperatures of, say, minus 30, but that's outdated. They do now, I promise. Unfortunately, this is, as many things are, expensive upfront and saves you money in the long term. They run on less electricity than heaters or AC. And they're, in fact, not that bad for the climate. They're not very energy hungry at all, and they can especially help people who live in hotter climates where the heat might genuinely be getting dangerous because of how hot it's getting. With a solar panel and a heat pump, if you don't have that much money, but you have those two things, you can afford to keep yourself cool all summer long. Isn't that nice?
If heat pumps are so good or whatever, how come I haven't heard of them and nobody I know has one? If you like heat pumps so much, why don't you marry them?
Thank you, Strawman. Well, the upfront cost is definitely higher than a gas boiler or buying an air conditioner, but they save you a lot of money in the long run. Which, of course, they are so efficient that, no surprise, gas lobbyists have been spending a lot of money to try and slow down their uptake, which is the other half of the problem. They committed nearly $1 million just to the New York Propane Association to spread misinformation about heat pumps and gassing up gas and making gas seem like the better option, even though it's not. Come on, New York Propane Association. Hank Hill did not die for this. So heat pumps are lower on the S-curve than, say, solar, but cheap electricity will make heat pumps an even better deal. And in the meantime, a lot of places have government subsidies, and if they don't, maybe you could bother your elected officials for one because it's more on the municipal state kind of level. And then there's one more problem. The other problem with this is split incentive. The landlord doesn't care how high your heating bill is because he's not paying it. And it would cost him money to replace your shitty gas furnace with a nice heat pump. So, of course, who wins? It's the landlord. Oh, also, your friend might have a heat pump. They just don't know about it because it's like an apartment and then they don't tell you. But they're pretty common. So, municipal level policy very much helps. You don't need to beg Trump for heat pump subsidies. Just bother your city council. They never get emails. Or they might even have one, but they just do a shitty job at advertising it. Happy?
Hello? Did you forget nuclear?
Yes, thank you, Strawman. Well, most nuclear energy is safe, and the waste gets stored responsibly, as opposed to fossil fuel, where the waste gets stored in our fucking lungs and our atmosphere. And it is pretty clean overall. I don't disagree with nuclear.
But you environmentalists back in the 1970s were saying it was evil and gonna kill us all.
Well, in the 70s, I was not alive, so moving on.
Can't trust these eco-cucks as far as I can throw them, which is not very far, since I'm made of straw.
Anyways, so I think that safe, well-run nuclear power plants should not be shut down. They are astonishingly safe. The risk of meltdown is near zero, and even if something does melt down, like 3 Mile Island, anybody who was around that received the amount of radiation in a chest x-ray. So, fueled by the fossil fuel industry, but unfortunately, solar and wind are just so cheap that developing nuclear doesn't make that much sense. I'm so sorry. But for the nuclear enjoyers, I do have a segment for you. There are specific industrial processes that just can't be electrified. Desalination, steel, cement. So for those, you could use a specific kind of nuclear reactor called a small modular reactor, or SMR, which has been pitched as producing enough energy to replace oil and gas in these big industrial processes. So modular means instead of each reactor being purpose-built from the ground up and it takes 10 years and it's too late to tackle the climate crisis because it's been 10 years already and it's not producing energy yet. Instead of doing that, you just crank them out in a factory and ship them in a box where they need to go, theoretically. Less like building a house from scratch and more like assembling IKEA furniture. I think this is a very cool idea. However, I am sort of breaking my unspoken rule for this video that I only talk about technology that's been affordably deployed at scale. SMRs are kind of new. They're only getting rolled out now. But if I left it out, everybody in the comments would be like, typical enviro cuck not talking about nuclear, etc., etc. Okay, so nuclear. Don't shut them down, but also I'm not, it's also, but we're building nuclear as an excuse for huge data centers. You know they're not powered by nuclear. They're being powered by natural gas. So much natural gas. So anyway, no bummers. Let's move on. Now, this might be the longest section because cars and trucks are big old polluters and really not that necessary. They account for 1/5 of the warming created by the US, but we can't tell people, hey, stop driving your car, if every other form of transportation absolutely fucking sucks and you're walking down the side of a highway and then you get flattened by an F-350 that doesn't even see you, okay? So this is not, if you live somewhere like Victoria, sure, ride your bike, but this is not necessarily an individual problem. Luckily, cities and countries are figuring out that they can tackle this and save a lot of money, both by incentivizing easier ways to get around and by decentering cars as the center of the universe for their cities. So join me as I talk about how we can stop using so many cars and save not just a lot of emissions, but also a lot of pain and isolation and paving over trees, etc. So I will put over top of this a lovely little bicycle ride down my city's bike corridor called the Galloping Goose. Enjoy that as I tell you about the magic of getting around without needing a goddamn car all the time. So first of all, before I get to the bike infrastructure, I just want to talk about e-bikes because they're also having a solar power moment where people go, oh, yeah, they're good for the climate. No, you don't understand. You don't understand how much they're growing. You don't understand how good they are. Like, first of all, just as an enjoyment factor, my God, people do not understand how fun an e-bike is to ride. You can replace your car with it if you live in a decently walkable city. And I did. I think there's a tweet that's like, e-bike evangelists have been lying to us for years. They've been understating how good they are, something like that. Yeah, here it is. Day 3 with an e-bike, and I've come to the conclusion that all the annoying evangelical e-bike enthusiasts weren't promoting them hard enough. I had the same exact experience, y'all. They're very good. Every time one of my friends rides my e-bike, they're like, I gotta get one. I'm responsible for 2 people owning e-bikes because they rode mine. Actually 3, I think. Yeah, guys, get one. This is the S-curve, is you put your friend on your e-bike and go, hey, take it for a spin. And then they go, I'm getting one. I'm throwing my car into the ocean. Don't do that. Oh, and in case you're worried about, but how do I carry stuff with my e-bike? Well, I personally just rent a car in the once every couple months situation where I need to move. But my friend Dave would like to submit some footage of his cargo bike hauling stuff as he moves house. A cargo bike is still going to be cheaper than buying a van or buying a truck. And I mean, plenty of people buy trucks for the once a year that they're going to have to haul a couch or whatever. So, you know, these things are pretty impressive. Hashtag carry shit Olympics. But anyway, having an e-bike is genuinely a life changer. You don't have to have a car, don't have to worry about parking, no insurance or gas, and there's lots of anti-theft things that you can do. You still get the sunlight, you still get the exercise and the outside time, you just don't show up to the function extremely sweaty after 45 minutes of cardio. Well, my camera overheated. Isn't that ironic? Now, it's not just because I love my e-bike that I'm talking about it. You might be wondering why I'm talking about e-bikes instead of like electric cars. Aren't those going to be a bigger deal? No. E-bikes have displaced 4 times the oil demand as all electric cars. So that means that for all of the oil that has not been burned because people are driving electric cars, 4 times that amount of oil has not been burned because people are riding e-bikes and e-scooters and mopeds and rickshaws, especially in Asia. The 280 million electric 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers have been taking China, India, and other Asian countries by storm. I'm just going to put in a picture of an electric tuk-tuk up here because, oh my god. Anyways, electric mopeds, scooters, and rickshaws are growing. Honestly, if the recent oil crisis in Asia gives us anything to go off of, it's only going to become more ubiquitous as people get sick of having to pay through the absolute nose for gas. Because e-bikes, extremely cheap. A 500-watt e-bike would cost about 1 penny per 5 miles biked. So if your daily commute is 10 miles, which is honestly a long commute, that's essentially free because here in Canada, we round down pennies. These e-bikes and so on are cutting daily oil demand by about 1 million barrels per day. Sorry, you're trying to chill. Per day. Which is roughly 1% of global oil demand that's shaved off by people using e-bikes and such. And I know that doesn't sound like much, but take that 1% and then think of everybody in your head that you know that probably could use an e-bike for most of their trips but don't. Just imagine all of them had e-bikes and then multiply that 1% by however many people that is. That's what we could do. If you don't have any friends that ride e-bikes instead of cars, well, now you do. So I know it sounds like a lot of this is happening in Asia, but a lot of this is happening here in Canada and the States too. Back in 2019, the US sold just 300,000-ish e-bikes, I'm rounding. And by 2022, that had climbed to 1.1 million, nearly 4 times improvement. And you know, most people I know who switched to e-bikes, they did that after 2022. Most of them pretty recent. And like e-bikes as a form of mobility are outselling electric cars. They used to just be outselling them 2-to-1 back in 2020, but by now there are 280 million versus 20 million EVs. So is that like a factor of almost 10? Something like that. That's what my notes say. 280 million electric bikes, etc., plus 20 million EVs. Pretty neat.
Aren't e-bikes just bikes for cheaters?
Well, thank you, Strawman. First of all, literally anything is better than driving a car. Are you driving a car?
I need a big truck to pick up my Costco.
Okay, sounds good. Well, you know, first of all, it's literally better than driving a car. But even if you're comparing it to a regular bike, you still get a good workout. And oh, do you mean climate-wise? Because climate-wise, actually, remember your Jevons paradox from earlier? Well, as something becomes more efficient, people use more of it, right? That applies to e-bikes like crazy. People who replace their bikes with e-bikes wind up cycling way more than they did before. This is where I get my produce from. I don't know if you can see, but they're picking it right now. So here's just one survey that shows this. And most of those kilometers that they bike are probably kilometers that they didn't drive. Kilometers? Yes, I'm Canadian. A survey showed that 55% of cyclists said they rode daily or weekly, but when they bought an e-bike, that went up to 91%. Can confirm. It's probably close to 100 for me. And per kilometer, one source I found showed that electric bikes are actually weirdly more carbon efficient than acoustic bikes. I think it has to do with, you know, the fact that burning our own energy counts as CO2, but I don't know, that's a little silly. But I will compare it from a bike to a car. Now, if you only had 1 kilogram of CO2 to spend getting to your destination, you could spend it to get 67 kilometers on an e-bike. So 1 kilogram of CO2 buys you 67 kilometers versus 33 kilometers for a bus versus 5 kilometers for a car. So it's a pretty big jump.
How am I supposed to do that if My whole city is highways.
Well, I'll tell you, you can fix your shitty city. I'll give you just a couple of big examples of revamping urban areas and literal tragedy. I cannot find my copy of Life After Cars anywhere, but a lot of this I'm getting from Life After Cars, so just pretend I'm displaying it proudly right here, okay? Okay. First off, we have Paris, which is probably the example most people know about like quickly turning a city from like a car hellscape into a very cool, bikeable, walkable, transitable city. But we'll go over it anyway because a lot of people have been to Paris and the idea of it changing this quickly, it's very nice. It's very hopeful. So, Mary Hidalgo's election in 2014 was spurred by anti-car pro-transit sentiment, but it took still a lot of lobbying from local groups to actually push the aggressive urbanist changes that she had actually promised. And in just a few years, Paris was turned from being completely covered in cars, including its most famous landmarks, which for some reason, you know, car blindness, where it's like, oh God, I didn't realize how much of my city was dedicated to cars until I started thinking about it. I had that in Paris for sure, because I look at these landmarks, I'm like, were those cars always there? But here, for example, is a picture of the Seine. The Seine? How do you say that? The Seine. It's the Seine. For example, here's a picture of the Seine, whose banks went from being a shitty strode to a beautiful common place. Paris added hundreds of kilometers of bike lanes under Plan Vélo, car-free Sundays, and in 2024, the city's citizens voted in a referendum to triple parking fees for giant SUVs, which, I like it. I like it. I think we should do it. They're rolling out a fleet of electric buses. It's hard for me to explain except for to show before and after videos, so I'll probably try and do that. I'll edit that into the video. But wowee. It's this prime example that these huge traffic-heavy cities can turn things around in pretty short order if there's enough support for it, and if the advocates are annoying enough. It really only takes a couple annoying advocates to really get places. Like, if you're looking at footage of the Galloping Goose right now, the city's bike activists are small but mighty. Yeah, so most of this happened not because of the new mayor, but because of incessant pestering by transit activists. Yay for bothering our elected officials. But I want to talk about another major city that you might not have been to, but I have. It is one of the best public transit systems I've ever seen short of New York, which was Bogotá, Colombia. So building trains is very expensive. Building subways is extremely expensive. It costs $50 to $1 million per kilometer. Per kilometer. We can't all be New York. But you know what's way, 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 way cheaper and almost as good as trains? Buses disguised as trains. Which takes that $50 million price tag down to $6 million. So almost a tenth. These are called bus rapid transit, or BRT, and specifically in Bogotá you have Transmilenio, and for some reason, when I remember going to Bogotá, in my mind I was on a train, but there were no trains, just speedy, on-time buses with elevated, efficient metro-like stations with the sliding doors, and prepayment turnstiles, and people selling fruit, and all that. And you even had the satisfaction of breezing past traffic, which is honestly what I remember most. Terrible, terrible congestion in Bogotá. Also, people drive, not my place to say, but interestingly. But yeah, breezing right past it on a bus because they have their own dedicated bus lanes. Your city, too, could simulate the thrilling experience of being on a train with just a bus lane and some nice stations. I want to talk about this one because we mainly hear about these overhauls being done in like super rich countries, but Bogotá was able to do it quite cheaply. And specifically, the mayor of Bogotá pointed out that he's not doing this because he like loves the climate or whatever. I mean, a lot of these changes were done in the 70s, actually. He's doing it because many people in Bogotá don't have cars and they can't afford cars. And so this is an equity problem. And he pointed this out when he was rolling out the Transmilenio and, the bike systems, which they have one of the largest dedicated bike lane networks, have been doing car-free Sundays since the 70s. You don't need an insane amount of money. In fact, bike lanes and bus lanes lead to lots less wear and tear on, like, the highways. So once again, you save money in the long run. You always save money in the long run. That's why me, an economist type person is talking about climate change, because once again you have this idea, oh my god, we could do bike lanes, or we could do solar panels, we could do heat pumps. Who's gonna pay for it? Bitch, you're paying in the future for not doing it. But I digress. The bus rapid transit system was such a success that it was rolled out in Mexico City, Guangzhou, Johannesburg, and Lagos. They all have bus rapid transit systems now. And the mayor who did all of this, Peñalosa, he did this by directing funding from parking lots and car infrastructure. Once again, very expensive if you have cars just hammering it all day. To public infrastructure, parks, libraries, public spaces, and these transit options. It's not about where the money comes from. It's literally about what are we willing to pay for? Where do we want the money that we have to go? And finally, I want to talk about a smaller city, because they are using bike infrastructure that is a lot like what you see here in Victoria, and I really like it. And listen, my fellow Victorians, I know it's been a wild one with all of the construction, but that's not all for bike lanes, okay? I know driving sucks, but if it's any consolation, biking is awesome. So, moving on, I want to talk about Ghent. This is directly ripped from the War on Cars, so if you enjoy this, please go read that book. So, a smaller city in Belgium, Ghent, where they didn't need years of revamping or construction or billions of dollars in infrastructure overhauls. A lot of these changes were made quite literally overnight. So the city had been moving towards car-centeredness, as most cities do. Just a quote from the book, many of its most significant and beautiful sites were overrun with cars. The plaza in front of the Ghent Belfry, a stunning medieval tower, had been converted to a parking lot. The Gravenstein, a castle dating from 1180, had bumper-to-bumper traffic right outside its stone walls. In 1960s, the city drained and paved over the Reep, a historic canal, to provide, you guessed it, more parking for the ever-growing number of cars. Over the 90s, there were a lot of changes made, but it was still a car city until Philip Wathieu, hope I said that right, deputy mayor of mobility, had an idea to turn it into the cycling city and reclaim all of that historic space that the cars had eaten up. But he didn't quite know how to do it because, Ghent isn't Amsterdam. It's not New York City. It's not Bogotá. A lot of those reforms don't make sense in Ghent. We shouldn't build a subway or maybe even a BRT. And he only had a few years to pull it off. So what did he do? Well, he knew that because, again, it's a smaller city, you can't just ban cars off of certain streets. You need to let ambulances, fire trucks, maintenance vehicles get in, the people who live on the street drive in, that kind of thing. So he based the transformation not off of Amsterdam, but off of a smaller Dutch city named Groningen, which kept the cars and car lanes, but made it impossible to drive directly through the city center. So what they did was they divided the city into 4 sections. Motorists could not directly go from one section to another. They just had to take a little ring highway to get from one section to another. And the result was, actually, outside of the ring, traffic reduced a lot. And it's also faster, easier, more convenient to walk around in those inner parts inside the ring. Fancy that. Pleasant and safe, too. So this didn't require huge infrastructure overhauls, just some signage changes, some new traffic rules, and Ghent did it. And the thing about Ghent that I think is very, very, it sticks with me, it stuck with me from the book, is he got so much hate. I think somebody might have mailed him a bullet. I'll show on the screen if that's true or not. People were furious. Just fight after city council, meeting after city council meeting. It's a communist plot to take away their cars. But he was, still like, well, this is what's best for most people, so I'm going to do it. And I'm just going to take this again, right from the book. After years of preparation and community engagement, Ghent's traffic circulation plan was implemented over the course of just one weekend. Workers removed or erected 2,500 signs, changed traffic flow on about 80 streets, and completely blocked cars from 14 locations. So on the streets where the cars are blocked, I know what they're talking about, and cars still can get in. We have a lot of those in Victoria. Bollards, blocks, and planters were placed in strategic spots on canal bridges. And this is the part that really sticks with me from the book. This is the part I think about a lot because he got yelled at so much. And yet, as soon as he left his house, he was biking around the city and, expected people to start throwing rotten tomatoes at him or whatever, or shooting him. But instead, he got resounding support. People came out of their houses to tell him, oh, great job. We are so glad you succeeded. Thank you so much for doing this. The city is so much better. Oh, I love it so much. From the first minute he walked out of his door, he got that. And he says, like, at this point, he has a police detail because there have been threats on his life, right? So he says, this is very strange for me because after 2.5 years, I came out and said, my God, where were you all this time?
I guess the rest of the goose
that's
is
the
under
thing,
construction.
The people who hated this were so vocal. Where are the people who would have benefited from it? Where are the people like me who would have loved to have extra bike lanes and would love to have my neighborhood be more walkable? Where were they? Were they at the city council? No, they were being quiet in their houses and not saying anything. How many cities do you think would be like that if instead of the vocal minority of people who hate bikes and love cars screaming at city council meetings, it was people like us? Well, actually, Victoria is a great example of that. I have a lot of friends who genuinely go to a lot of city council meetings to vouch for bikes.
All these detour signs just for bikes, isn't that delightful? It's crazy how nice it is when your chosen form of transportation isn't treated with contempt.
Victoria, we do have a lot of bike lanes, but in places where they don't make as much sense, we just put up signs saying, for example, no entry except bicycles, and then people can like drive their cars there if they live there, if it's an emergency, but it's kind of blocked off and it's not enjoyable to drive through. So you can't drive straight through a residential area, but you can drive like down a highway and then turn off down the bike primarily bike lane, mixed use lane. It's nice. Hopefully I'm showing a visual aid because I'm doing a bad job of explaining this.
Except bicycles, but clearly the people who live here can still get their cars in. It's just they can't rip down it at like 100 kilometers an hour, which means it's pretty safe for me.
You don't need every street to be covered in bike lanes. You just need enough room on additional side streets for cyclists and walkers to be comfortable on it, and then you can still have your major arteries for cars, you can still have your major bike lanes, but it doesn't need to be that dramatic of an overhaul. So how did it work for Ghent? To quote the book again, the number of cars in the city center dropped by 20%, leading to a drastic improvement in air quality. Nitrous oxide levels fell by 18 to 20%. Traffic crashes fell about 40% in less than a year. Before the implementation of the traffic circulation plan, 22% of all trips in Ghent were made by bike. Pretty good already, honestly. By the very next year, 2018, they hit their 2030 target of 35% of all trips being done on bike. However, your city might not be able to do this. Why? Because of the big, stupid law that prevents them from building things like bus and bike lanes and pedestrian stuff and having density. And some of you already know what I'm going to say. A dramatic sip. Parking minimums. Think about how much of your grocery store is mostly parking lot, or your apartment building, or your school, or the place that you work. Just like imagine it in your head and then imagine how big the parking lot is next to the main thing. So about 1 floor out of the 3 floors of apartments here. So about a quarter of the floor space here. No, more than a quarter. Yeah, way more than a quarter for this apartment building, and we don't have a lot of parking. And it not only makes climate change worse, but it also immediately heats things up. Like, it makes it worse in the future and also now. It dramatically heats up the city you live in to have it all covered up by pavement, and also worse to live in. Once you start walking around, you kind of notice it. Like, oh, this property is taken up half by parking spots. This property is taken up half by parking spots. Wow, I sure would have less of a walk to do if everything wasn't parking lots. Yeah, once you see it, you can't unsee it. But all this wasted land isn't just for no reason. I mean, you gotta park. But also because most cities have built-in parking minimum codes requiring new developments of any kind to provide off-street parking for a given number of vehicles per residential unit or per expected shopper. These minimums are, I believe, the guy whose name I'm forgetting who wrote The High Cost of Free Parking. Donald Shoup. As Donald Shoup puts it, it is not scientific. It is literally just vibes-based guessing. So let me quickly clarify what I mean by the math makes no sense, because I wanted to give more examples. One city's church requires 1 space per 5 seats, while another city's would require 1 space per 3 seats in the pew. Because these numbers were never derived from actual studied parking demand, they were just sort of made up, vibes-based, picked arbitrarily by some planning board, and then copied and pasted, and now it's everybody's problem forever. This is what we mean by it doesn't really make any sense. It's just arbitrary. Donald Shoup compares it to astrology, but honestly, I've had astrology readings more accurate than some of these. One funeral home is legally required to have one parking spot for every 50 square feet of specifically grieving area, so like one space per square unit of sadness, while your city might be required to put, while another city might require, I don't know, 5 parking spots per bowling lane, which, each of the 5 guys in your lane has got to drive separately to the bowling alley, and maybe that's why bowling alleys have been dying since the 90s. They can't afford to put up all that fucking parking. One planning document that I found had a rule of thumb that was a whopping 3-to-1 ratio. So 3 square foot of parking for every square foot of store or restaurant or other building. 3 square foot of car house for every 1 square foot that humans are to use. Unlike, say, safe bike lanes or allowing outdoor dining or affordable housing, most cities tacitly prioritize house for car above all of this other stuff. And fair enough, the cargo room, I get it, we love car, but it isn't just annoying to look at and making your city hotter, it's literally making it harder to use any other form of transportation, including your legs, a bike, a bus, etc. Think about it. If I bought a giant couch and just expected to have a spot for it everywhere I go, they'd be like, hey, stop bringing your giant couch around. We don't care how cozy it is. My couch is not as big as a car, but anywho. But some groups have been popping up saying parking minimums should only be for disability parking, and governments should no longer prioritize housing cars above housing people. Crazy. And I wanted to tell you about this because the people from whom I got the book that I'm not holding up because I can't find it, Life After Cars, actually did it. They abolished parking minimums in Nanaimo, which is a city near Victoria. And it really only takes a couple of people to get that policy changed. I know the 2 main ones, and it is they just pushed it and got it done because they convinced people it was ridiculous. Most places just sort of have this by default and haven't thought about it at all. And now Nanaimo is very exciting. It's going to be a much nicer place to live and walk and bike and bus. And maybe it's slightly harder to find parking, but if more people are biking, less people are parking. Bam. This too is on an S-curve, just like heat pumps, just like solar panels, just like e-bikes. This is also on an S-curve. Once again quoting the book, the push for adoption of such reform, according to sustainability professional Sarah Stewart, is a great example of the contagion phase in political diffusion theory, which explains how policy innovations spread exponentially. When a policy succeeds and is popular and effective, legislatures that were initially reluctant to embrace change grow bolder and begin to adopt measures that once seemed out of the question, until only a few lagging or hesitant legislatures are left. Per Strong Towns, in 2019, only 20 cities in North America had removed parking minimums, and by 2024, that was 88. And under that post are a bunch of people being like, hey, wait a second, my city removed parking minimums, or we decreased them. Why aren't we on this map? So I think it's a lot more than 88, but we'll just go with that for now. So this is a thing we can do. We can make our cities better. We can make our cities better quickly. We can make our cities better by getting rid of the stupid legislation that prevents them from getting better. And we can optimize it so that people can not have to drive cars, but can drive e-bikes, but can drive electric tuk-tuks, which I'm going to buy as soon as I finish this video. People can walk or bus, and yes, some people can still drive if they need to. There'll be less idiots on the road like me. I was never good at driving. You're all very lucky I don't have a car anymore because I'm a dumbass. But I do want to give a quick word about electric vehicles. I know they're kind of overblown as a climate solution, and if you're watching this, you're probably already on one side of the argument or another. But I keep up with oilprice.com, the premier news site for oil and gas investors, because I'm a freak. And what they see as the biggest threat isn't e-bikes or solar, but in fact, electric vehicles, because they do, in fact, displace a lot of demand, especially in the US, and because they're just sort of perceived as being the new big thing. Electric vehicles are cheaper if you factor in not having to use gas. They're much more climate friendly. The batteries are getting better every single year, and in fact, EV battery innovation is helping clean energy because they're innovating them for the EVs, and then they're using them for other stuff like solar and wind storage. For example, the Chinese sodium batteries that are made of salt instead of lithium. That was for EVs first. Now, I know people are going to need cars, and I'm optimistic about EVs. So if you have one, hell yeah. And also, can we please can we please get some of those Chinese electric cars here? Because, like, every Uber driver in Mexico City drove a BYD, and they were sick, and they're like $5. Please, please let us import more. The one good thing Mark Carney did. Now I would like to talk about the climate solution that you have the most control over, which is food. I know it's hard to hear somebody preaching to go vegan. I'm not vegan. But honestly, it's just about making the swaps wherever you can. I'm vegetarian, and I love being vegetarian because it aligns with my values, makes me eat healthier in general, and someday I would like to go vegan, but I'm not going to tell anybody else to do that. Just swap out beef for beans where you can. Meat creates 4 to 18% of all global emission and 32% of methane emissions, which are much, much stronger than CO2. The thing about meat is it requires a lot of land, way more land than you probably would expect. You need land to grow the tons of soybeans that you feed to cows, which is why soy is more expensive than it should be. You need the land for the cows, and because of this, beef and dairy is one of the leading causes of deforestation, especially of the Amazon rainforest. Like, they are slashing that shit so they can put more cows in it. It is a bummer. So eating less cows can literally save the Amazon. Sorry to be the one to tell you. Meat takes up 37% of our diet, but 83% of the farmland. And more than 2/3 of all agricultural land is devoted to growing feed for livestock, while only 8% is used to actually grow food that people eat. Imagine that. If we want to reclaim parts of Earth and rewild them so that they can be carbon sinks, we're just gonna have to eat less meat. And honestly, I don't get what all the fuss is about. I've tried it. It's okay. If you've heard these scary headlines about like food scarcity because of Hormuz, or because of extreme weather, well, just know that anytime you switch beef for beans, you're cutting your own strain on that system in half, because it takes half as much energy to feed yourself plants as it does to feed yourself meat. But I know it's not just about what you do. I know that. So let's talk about how we can make it easier for everybody to eat less meat. If our governments cut the subsidies that they give to meat and dairy, which is also another reason why it's artificially cheaper than plant-based alternatives, like, yes, that is why oat milk is 3 times the price of dairy milk, even though it's fucking oats and water, and milk is, you gotta raise an entire cow for it. But, so you could shift those subsidies to plants, and it would make emissions much lower, and everybody would be healthier. And New York City has already done this. Once again, the Mamdani effect. Actually, this happened before Mamdani. I just slammed a big bite of just straight up raw pumpkin seeds, so I'm really not beating the rabbit allegations. Okay, why are these kind of good with no salt? I'm gonna use them to cook with, but they're just kind of like good. Sorry, misophonia, I will not be chewing near the mic. So New York has actually beat its 2030 emissions reductions target already. And a big part of that is because of their food policy. They realized that most of their food-based tax money was going towards dairy and meat, which not only sucks for the climate, but also very economically efficient because of all of those extra steps that I talked about. You gotta feed the cow, you gotta kill the cow, etc. So they increased their purchase of legumes, nuts, and seeds by 130% since 2019, and bought way more fruits and veggies, which then would go to its public schools, hospitals, elder care, homeless shelters, so on and so forth. Which is nice, because I imagine people in homeless shelters or hospitals, or God forbid the American public school system, that's a cell phone, I can say that, I'm also American, don't care about reducing their carbon footprint, because they shouldn't. You're in the hospital, you're in a homeless shelter, you shouldn't need to care. But they just care about eating well, and now they can do both. Now they can eat better, and the entire city can cut its carbon footprint. Incredible. Sorry, I know carbon footprint is a propaganda term, but unfortunately it is useful. The New York government last year instructed 11 of its agencies to eliminate all the notoriously bad for you processed meat. Like, I don't have the statistics right now, but processed meat is not good for you, and increase the amount of minimally processed plant proteins used in meals and snacks. And the change is set to take effect this month, I guess, in July. Cool. Hey guys, Zoran Mamdani here. I turned off the animal crushing machine. The switch was right there, right next to the healthier food for vulnerable populations switch. So I went ahead and I flipped that one on. I hope that's okay. You know the orphan crushing machine tweet? Bigger governments can do this. And honestly, depending on how things go food-wise after Hormuz, We may have to. We spend billions subsidizing the mind-blowingly inefficient, often unhealthy, climate-destructive, and yes, cruel, if you care about that sort of thing, meat and dairy industry, when we could support local farmers and producers and plant protein instead. If we wanted to. It would not be a hard switch to make for our governments. Now, I will not harp on the health benefits much more of eating plant-based, because, I love Oreos and vegan chicken wings as much as the next guy. But a more plant-based diet is pretty much always good for you. Don't listen to the carnivores, okay? Like, the healthiest people are the people who are on the Mediterranean diet, which is basically just plants, lots of olive oil, a bit of fish, maybe some chicken, 2 to 3 cigarettes a day, a glass of wine, you look at the ocean, you yearn. The Mediterranean diet, it's really good for you. They live the longest. And it also happens to be one of the most climate-friendly, non-vegetarian diets you can have. Also, for God's sake, please stop serving so much meat at climate conferences. I swear to God, if I have to eat the olives and pickles off of a charcuterie board and crackers because there's nothing else to eat, I'm gonna lose it. This is a climate conference. You have to have tofu there, please. Next up is something that's a little bit finicky, but it's more of a good news story than I genuinely thought it would be. I kept getting stuck on the resistance to pipelines and fossil fuel infrastructure and also deforestation because, some won and some lost, but most of the time there wasn't really a clear win or loss. But Indigenous resistance, also supported by non-Indigenous activists, has been key to destroying much, much less of the world. People will put literal bodies on the line all the time to prevent the destruction of their lands. They'll block pipelines, export terminals, logging trucks, and so on and so on. And it's kind of hard to determine whether or not they've won because it's it gets deferred, it gets delayed, and then, it gets canceled, or, sometimes it goes through, but it's way over budget. Yeah. So this is going to be its own video, but I picked up this book, Clayoquot and Descent, from Tofino, which is also on Vancouver Island near Victoria, and they have saved old-growth forests, seriously, seriously ancient forest. Trees thousands of years old, way bigger than you can imagine. I know, because I looked at them and I was like, that's a building. And the Clayoquot Sound, they saved them from being logged and finally got them under Indigenous protection. And it's one of the most resounding success stories in Canadian conservation history. Years of organizing, thousands of people, one of the largest acts of civil disobedience in Canadian history, 1,000 arrests, First Nation blockades, so on and so on and so on. So I have this book here. This is from 1993. I didn't realize it when I bought it. And it's just at the tail end of these protests. So they didn't know that they would have won. And there's this essay near the end, taking stock 1 year later, and they're basically saying, it feels like we might have lost a little bit. We did our best, but I don't think we won because these logging companies are still cutting down these trees illegally, even though we got an injunction for them to stop. And it took many more years until it was officially fully protected. But these guys did win, and they just didn't know it when they wrote this book. And you just need a longer view of these things. So I think that's nice. But anyways, it's crazy to read this bummer of a piece being we didn't do, we tried our best. And it's one of the biggest successes in old growth preservation ever. So anywho, this is all to say, when you're doing things like civil disobedience, you never know whether you've been successful until you zoom way, way out. Sometimes these campaigns to block environmental destruction worked. The 1,000-year-old trees are protected, the pipeline gets canceled, the gas project gets shut down, whatever. And sometimes it goes ahead, way delayed and more expensive, but the pipeline gets built and the land gets destroyed, and it really sucks. And so I just wanted to sort of take stock of how often these movements actually work. And luckily, there's this big old document from the Indigenous Environmental Network and Oil Change International that outlines exactly how much environmental destruction that didn't happen because of these activists. And oh baby, I like it a lot. Indigenous campaigns are resisting projects equal to at least 1/4 of the US and Canadian greenhouse gas pollution. Indigenous campaigns are resisting projects equal to at least 1/4 of US and Canadian greenhouse gas pollution.
Sorry, I'm just going to repeat that one more time because it took a few reads for me to fully get the gravity of it. 1/4 of the US and Canadian greenhouse gas pollution is being resisted, is being prevented by these campaigns as of 2021. So it's a bit old, but
it is equal to 400 coal-fired power plants, which is twice as many as there are in the US and like 100 times as many as there are in Canada. 50 times as much. Yeah, 50. The report notes, these impressive figures underestimate total Indigenous resistance since this report focuses on just the largest and most iconic projects. So unfortunately, some of these did go ahead, like this was written in 2021, like the Dakota Access Pipeline did go through, but some of them have since been canceled completely. So as of when this was written in 2021, the US and Canada would emit 6.6 billion metric tons of CO2 a year. Indigenous resistance has prevented 1.6 billion tons, including almost a billion tons of full-on victories that will never get emitted because these projects were blocked, which is a crazy number. But I think I believe this report because, I mean, there's really nothing more powerful than just like putting yourself on the line for it. Oh, and that's not even counting the trees. And speaking of which, it turns out that the people whose ancestors have been on the land for a long ass time tend to know how to take care of the land
better than the people whose
ancestors have been here for like 5 minutes. It's not as simple as just stop messing with nature, although maybe we should stop messing with it a little bit. There's this whole meme of, you know, humanity saying, oh, we're a parasite, we're the problem, we're a plague. And it's like, no, we don't have to be if we don't want to. It's not our fault. Well, I mean, it is our fault, but it's not our fault for being human. It's our fault for fucking it up. Humans have a role to play in ecology. We literally don't have to be the parasite if we don't want to. And this is why Indigenous stewardship is, once again, this is a bigger climate solution than I initially thought when I was researching this video. Forests that have Indigenous stewardship, aka are taken care of by the people who spent centuries learning how to take care of it, for example, absorb 50% more carbon than the ones that don't have Indigenous stewardship. Now, if you're not familiar with carbon capture, you're probably expecting me to talk about it. You know, the big machines that governments and big oil are investing billions of dollars into that are supposed to suck up all the carbon out of the sky and store it underground. Well, for a lot of reasons that I am not going to say because this is a no bummers video, that shit does not work at all. Do not believe people who say that it works. Certain kinds of carbon capture work, but the one that captures carbon out of the air, that does not work. That will not happen. So especially Canadians, you will hear, oh, we're building the pipeline, but we're going to build a carbon capture. No, they're not. Most carbon capture facilities burn more carbon than they capture. Sorry. Anyways, back to things that do work. Plants capture carbon. Forests capture carbon. They're a better carbon capture machine than humans could ever make in a million years. Forests absorb 16 billion metric tons of carbon, which is about 40% of our emissions. There will never be a carbon capture technology like forests, especially these forests that are taken care of by people who know how to manage them. So, if you've ever heard of the idea of land back, this is it. The more land that is returned to Indigenous stewardship, the better the land does, the more carbon it stores, the healthier its biodiversity, and that means the less likely we are to have biodiversity collapse, and the less likely also it is to get fucking fracked or whatever. And there are lots of examples of this happening. Here on Vancouver Island, it's happening, though not enough. And, well, you know how California is always on fire? Well, partly it's because of climate change, for sure. Don't say that it's not. But it's also because we're not quite managing the forests as well as we could. But in Humbug Valley, or Tasmamkoyam, I hope I'm saying that right, thousands of acres have been returned to the Maidu, who are now doing controlled burns and pruning to actually prevent wildfires, which is probably going to have a ripple effect of somehow preserving even more nature than what was actually returned. And on a larger scale, some countries have even granted nature itself right. Like in Ecuador, I was reading a book. Once again, I have all these books on ebooks, so I can't display them proudly on my big stack. But Is a River Alive? I picked up that book on ebook, and it is lovely. It talks about how when you give rivers rights, good things happen. When you give nature as an entity rights, much like how corporations have rights, good things happen. In Ecuador, the indigenous Andean worldview already prioritizes caring for nature. And, you know, if corporations can be people, so can nature. So Ecuador gave nature, or Pachamama, they gave it rights as a living being. And it has like a whole list of rights. Actually, I should go find them. Okay, it's very long. Ecosystems are considered rights holders. Article 14 recognizes the right to live in a healthy, ecologically balanced environment. And in the 2008 Constitution, nature, or Pachamama, has the right to integral respect for the existence and the maintenance and regeneration of its life cycles, structure, functions, and evolutionary processes. Any person, community, or nationality can demand enforcement from public authorities. Now that's the important part. You have to demand enforcement, or else it won't get enforced, unfortunately. But this held up recently. So the Constitution was in 2008. In 2021, we have the Los Cedros cloud forest, which is just incredible. And it was going to be strip mined for some fucking reason, because of course. And while it did take a lot of work from activists and lawyers, the judge did in fact find that because nature is people, we're not going to let them do that. We're going to respect Pachamama's rights. And that's pretty nice. So now we still have the Los Cedros cloud forest instead of a bunch of mining. Fantastic. There are many other examples of this. I'll just give you one more. Peru recently acknowledged the La Marañón. Yes. Peru also recently, in 2024, acknowledged the Marañón River as an entity with rights after Cucama indigenous women fought for years against pollution and oil spills. The ruling names the Cucama as the river's representatives and guardians and was upheld in 2024, despite opposition from the Ministry of the Environment and the state oil company, Petroperu. Incredible. So the problem with a lot of these rights of nature laws is that they don't get upheld, but having them there in the first place gives these defenders, these activists, the ability to say, hey, this is wrong. And a lot of the time what will happen is while land defenders are defending their land, these lawsuits will be going on in the background, and eventually they'll get wrapped up and it'll be like, oh man, I guess they actually didn't have the right to destroy that entire forest, but they haven't gotten to destroy the entire forest yet because land defenders were there. It kind of works hand in hand. Now, I'm going to be briefly a bummer for just 2 seconds. Just this next one, I have to bum you out for a second before I lift you back up, okay? This is a success story that deniers like Trump have managed to turn into proof that he's right and climate change is not real because he doesn't understand cause and effect, I guess. Yeah, you environmentalists talk about the ozone layer and you talk about acid rain. What happened to acid rain? We literally fixed it. That's what happened. That's why we fixed it. Anyway, let me read you a Trump tweet and explain why it's actually a good thing. He says, I'm not going to do a Trump voice. After 15 years of the Democrats promising that climate change, quote unquote, is going to destroy the planet, the United Nations top climate committee just admitted that their own projections, RCP 8.5, were wrong. And it's okay. I understand that at that advanced level of dementia, you're not really going to understand how cause and effect worked. Somebody should take his phone from him. But in the meantime, oh my God, did you guys see the thing where he was saying that the CHIPS Act was giving priority to transgender people when he meant to say transistors? He literally misread transistors as transgender. The derangement syndrome. Okay, anyway. Okay, no bummers. Okay, so the worst scenario, RCP 8.5, or Representative Concentration Pathway 8.5, was known as the worst case scenario, and scientists, not the UN Climate Committee, like he said, just climate scientists, deemed it implausible. Not impossible, just not worth factoring into your models. RCP 8.5 would result in 4.3 degrees of warming, but because of, quote, the emergence of climate policy, the decreasing cost and rising adoption of renewable energy and shifts in emissions trends, it has been discounted because solar has surpassed coal, for example. Which the ironic thing is, if Trump had his way, this scenario is exactly what would happen. No solar, no wind, just clean coal, a Trump future. But luckily he doesn't have his way, and most countries are just moving on with or without the US, as we'll see later. Some people consider this the business as usual scenario, but this is the upper end of if we just kept emitting. Now, unfortunately, the elimination of the worst case also had the elimination of the best case scenario because we are already locked into 1.5 degrees of warming. But the author's intention specifically wasn't to tell people to kick back and chill out because it's all gravy now. Just to show that implementing climate policies does work, if we do, and we need to do much, much more of it. Unfortunately, it seems like some governments are taking it the opposite way. According to one Redditor I saw who works in climate policy, he was saying that a lot of elected officials are just going, oh, okay, good. The world isn't literally going to end. I can chill. That's not... We've avoided apocalypse, but not the near apocalypse. So I want to quote an actuarial report from the UK. At this point, warming is probably going to be somewhere between 2 to 3 degrees. If we're lucky, it's under 2 degrees. And before you go, okay, well, it's settled. You know how you've heard climate activists say every tenth of a degree matters? So an actuarial report from the UK shows that the difference between 2 degrees Celsius of warming and 3 degrees Celsius of warming is several billion lives. So you know when climate activists tell you, every tenth of a degree matters, they mean every tenth of a degree is millions of humans. That is what that means, basically. It's not an everybody dies scenario anymore. But we still need to work very, very hard to keep those deaths out of the billions. Now, with that scary fact out of the way, here's one way that we already managed to save millions, maybe billions of lives. It's hard to tell. But if you fondly remember Scholastic book fairs and can immediately remember the AOL dial tone, first of all, you should probably start stretching. And second of all, remember the ozone layer? What the hell ever happened to that? Along with quicksand, it was one of those things that we were told as a kid was going to be a real big problem, and then we kind of never ran into it. So what happened? Was it all a hoax? Were we just alarmist for no reason? Well, I'm so glad you asked. So we did kind of solve the ozone layer problem, and I'll tell you how in a bit, but first of all, I'll tell you what we avoided. NASA has a model called the World Avoided. By the year 2020, in the simulation, 17% of global ozone gets destroyed. An ozone hole forms each year over the Arctic and the Antarctic. By 2040, the ozone hole is global. The UV index in mid-latitude cities reaches 15. So you don't know probably what the UV index would be. Right now it's very nice and sunny outside. It's about 6. You would get a scalding sunburn within minutes of being outside of 15. The hottest it ever gets is like a UV index of 10, and we're talking 15. There's a movie clip that shows what would happen if the ozone layer falls apart, and it's kind of funny, but like one guy has his arm out of a car and then immediately gets scalded as the ozone layer just like that's not that out of the question. So by the middle of the 21st century, computer models suggest that in the world we avoided, global ozone levels would decline nearly 70%, doubling the intensity of UV radiation at Earth's surface. 70% by the middle of the 21st century. Rates of skin cancer and cataracts would soar. The extra dose of UV would damage crops, potentially leading to worldwide famines. And it would have a cascade of devastating effects on wild plants and animals, which, like us, have evolved to survive with an ozone layer, and the UV would just kill them. By the 2050s, the ozone layer completely collapses, and by the end of the model run, which is 2065, the intensity of UV radiation at Earth's surface doubles. We do not survive that kind of a thing. Skin cancer rates would soar, is what they say, but I think it would probably be worse than a little bit of skin cancer. At certain shorter wavelengths, intensity rises by as much as 10,000 times. Widespread vegetation dieback, huge amounts of carbon into the atmosphere, heating even worse. Not even synthetic building materials would be safe from rapid deterioration without the ozone layer. So that, folks, in case you weren't paying attention and just went, hey, wasn't this supposed to be good climate news? That is the world avoided by saving the ozone layer. So how did we save the ozone layer? It was through a lot of activism, a lot of scientists and protesters speaking up, and through global participation between countries to phase out CFCs, or chlorofluorocarbons, which are refrigerants and also, yes, in hairspray. RIP to all the sick-ass 80s hairstyles. The sacrifice was worth it, if only just barely. Now, there were ozone deniers. This isn't like everybody just held hands and agreed. The science was settled that CFCs were harming the ozone layer, but scientists didn't quite know how much or how much CFC reduction would be required to save the ozone layer. And yet people listened to them for the most part, other than a few ozone deniers. And there was a lot of obstruction with the countries trying to phase it down. But after many years of activism, a global treaty was signed in 1987, which is called the Montreal Protocol, which limits use of CFCs, saving the ozone layer. So how were we able to do this? Well, I mean, your uncle wasn't on Facebook yet, so the ozone denial wasn't nearly as crazy as it probably would be today. But also people taking scientists seriously. So the world moved on from CFCs. They aren't as widespread as carbon, but so it wouldn't be quite as easy to just cut all carbon as it was to cut all CFCs, but it's still very impressive that they managed to get it done. The only problem was a lot of these CFCs were replaced with HFCs, or hydrofluorocarbons, which not as bad for the ozone layer, but very, very warming. But because we had the already successful Montreal Protocol just like hanging out there, we took a Kigali Amendment, stuck it on there, and said, hey, we got to phase out HFCs as well. And of HFCs is coming down gradually once again. We may cut 0.5 degree of warming by the end of the century because we tacked on HFCs to the existing ozone layer treaty. Very cool. Okay, that was a little bit nerdy, so let's come back down to earth and talk about something that would actually benefit everybody, which is a 4-day work week. And yes, you are starting to see the secret agenda behind my recent anti-work videos. A 4-day work week could cut carbon by a lot. I mean, it kind of makes sense once you think about it. First of all, commuting, yes, obviously, but also all of the high carbon conveniences that exist because people are too busy with work to like cook their own food instead of paying for a private taxi for their burritos. Think of all the trips to work, all the air travel, and not just that. Apparently, there are also lots of carbon emissions related to data sending, data storage. I didn't quite understand that part, but I'll just read it to you. So overall, people in the US are shown to emit 10% less carbon on their days off, and some slightly different math shows that a 10% reduction in hours is associated with an 8.6% fall in carbon footprint, so similar. And I should note that a 4-day work week is a 20% reduction in hours. So would that 8.6% double? I don't know. But it means our carbon emissions would go down by more than we would think. And the report says they're not quite sure how the carbon intensity drops off, but it's because people engage in low-carbon activities like hiking or stay-at-home hobbies. We already know that a 4-day work week generally has no resulting drop in productivity. 90% of the companies that try it keep it. So there really aren't that many downsides. But unfortunately, legislating 4-day work weeks hasn't worked, even though it would work for both productivity and climate reasons. And the only place this has really been trialed, like as a government policy, is because of energy shortage, because of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz in certain Asian countries. So that's kind of a bummer, but hopefully people are enjoying those 4-day work weeks. I guess that does prove that it reduces energy usage, so it probably would reduce your carbon footprint, eh? And of course, you've got the Bernie Sanders 4-day work week bill that will never pass in a Republican-controlled House. But hey, you know, a girl can dream. But yes, it turns out working 4-day work weeks is, in many research, many research shows that a 4-day work week would reduce carbon emissions very significantly. So that's nice. Now, I don't quite think that I have filled 2 hours, so I might have to tack some more onto the end of this video. But the last thing I want to tell you about today, anyway, is the Fossil Fuel Conference. Now, you might have heard about COP, which is the UN Conference of Parties on Climate Change, and it's usually, you hear about like it's some big number like COP29 or COP31. Every year that goes by, just number get bigger, emission also get bigger. They don't seem to make much progress at the COPs, unfortunately. Everybody's very frustrated every time they have to go to the COPs. It took till just a couple years ago for them to even mention phasing down fossil fuels. And my nerd ass was watching it like the Super Bowl, like, hey, they might mention fossil fuels this year. And we go, whoa. And then, oh, it's looking like it's been approved on the draft. And we go, whoa. And then when I saw it wasn't phasing out fossil fuels. No. They had to change it to phasing down, which it was even a win for them to acknowledge the thing that is causing climate change is causing climate change at a climate conference. This is not the good news part of the story, I know. The problem is that there's all this meddling from oil companies and their lobbyists, and oil companies masquerading as countries like Saudi Arabia and, yes, the USA. And the thing about COP is it relies on a consensus. And so Anybody can throw a stick into the wheels of progress and be like, nah, not me, I don't wanna. I'm making so much money off of my oil, I don't wanna. Which is great. So, and they veto it, as especially big petro states. Especially big petro states will veto all the time, which is why it took so long for the stupid agreement to even mention fossil fuels. So, okay, why am I talking about this? This all sounds like very bad news. More annoying than terrible news. But, at COP28 in Dubai, yes, Dubai, the country that is so flush with oil money it blew it all on making a giant island that's shaped like palm trees, everybody at the Dubai conference got so frustrated on the lack of process that they spun it off into another conference and didn't invite the US. Thus was born the first international conference on the just transition away, not phasing down, away from fossil fuels. It convened just a few months ago in April in Colombia, and next year it's going to be in the low-lying, very climate vulnerable country of Tuvalu. So the conference centered on 3 themes: reducing economic dependence on fossil fuels, transforming supply and demand, advancing international cooperation. And yes, I did intentionally just talk about the ozone layer stuff right before this so that you could see how successful international cooperation can look when there's not some asshole vetoing it. So here are the results. First, a lot of countries have now written firmer, more detailed roadmaps to use less fossil fuels instead of having vague targets like, net zero by 2050, I promise. It's like, no, here's how we're going to do it, by the way. They changed trade policies. Now I'm going to get very nerdy on you. If I lose you, I'm so sorry. So I'll try and make this not too nerdy. If you look around you, most of the stuff that you own was probably not made in the country that you're living in unless you're pretty rich, or unless you live in a country that does a lot of production. But like here in Canada, all my shit is made in China or Bangladesh, or you know what I mean, right? And so who's responsible for the emissions that made this shirt? Well, right now, it's wherever the shirt was made. Those are their emissions, which is pretty crazy. So you see things like, the UK is decreasing their emissions, but that's because it doesn't do a lot of its own production. It outsources its production. And it imports all of the capital S stuff and then just relies on like services for its economy. So this is why trade policies are very important, so that you can go, okay, those emissions were made in Bangladesh, but then the shirt that was made by those emissions got shipped to Canada. This is used. This doesn't count. This is zero emissions because I bought it used. #thrifting. Anyways, that's why trade policies are important. That's why it got included in this conference. So this is called CBAM, or Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, to account for the carbon emissions for who they should account for. That didn't make sense, but you know what I mean. This is called carbon leakage, which prevents certain amounts of carbon from being counted. You can't really reduce emissions if you don't know where your carbon emissions are coming from. And if you say, Bangladesh is emitting so much and they're just making all of our shit, it's not quite fair, is it? And third, finances. And the other reason that these trade mechanisms are important is because you go, there's a carbon tax here in Canada. There's not a carbon tax, whatever. There's a carbon tax here in wherever. But there's not a carbon tax in Bangladesh, so we're just going to import stuff from there to avoid having to pay the carbon tax. CBAM, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, says no, you still have to pay that carbon tax. So I like that. I think it's nice. And yes, a lot of countries still have carbon taxes. Anyway, we had to go and axe it, didn't we? We got to go and axe the tax. And third, it tackled finances. So we already know that transitioning to a net zero economy is cheaper than not doing it. But putting up the infrastructure initially is going to be expensive, especially for the historically exploited countries that are now energy poor. Much like how poor people have to continuously pay money to an exploitative landlord, then the money that they would probably spend on a mortgage if they were able to get a mortgage, but they can't get a mortgage because they can't put down the down payment because they're stuck paying rent. It's very similar for energy poor countries. So they're locked into renting fossil fuels without some assistance on the down payment from the countries that have, already gotten rich off of polluting the hell out of the biosphere. So we will need to finance this for them without trapping these countries into debt, which, if you don't know about that, this is a very common form of neocolonialism. We need to finance this without any strings attached. These talks included over half of the global economy, by the way. One fun thing about this conference is that before the conference, they had a pre-conference of just scientists, and then the scientists did their conference, and then they like wrote a list of recommendations for the policymakers, who then listened to them. What a concept! So over half of the world's economy was a part of this conference, and they just left behind the losers and the petrostates, basically. So they actually made a lot of progress. And many, though not all of these countries, signed on to the Fossil Fuel Treaty, which is based off of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaties, which is what helped us, if you remember, not all die in a fallout situation. It's a legally binding treaty that prevents the proliferation or continued use of fossil fuels. It's not binding yet, but like they're just signing on in their interest. But a major result of this conference, remember, it's the first just this year, a couple months ago, was to show, hey, most of humanity wants this. We can do this if we want to. Progress has never been all or nothing. Like the abolition of slavery and women's rights to vote happened first in a couple countries and a couple governments, and then it catches on, and then it spreads across the entire world. It could happen in this case. It will happen in this case. And my good friend Michael Mez actually did an interview with Johan Rockström, who you might be familiar with him because he's a very famous climate science guy who popularized the idea of climate tipping points, which are very scary things that could happen if we hit a certain amount of warming, causing cascading effects. But he seemed weirdly chipper on Mez's podcast, Better Future, by the way. Go check it out. He's usually a doomsayer, but in this case, or less of a doomsayer and more of a, hey guys, lock in, this is very, very bad sayer. But because of this fossil fuel conference, he was actually very chipper. He was like, hey, if these countries do genuinely stop using fossil fuels and become more green and more equitable, it will create a positive tipping point. People will look at these countries who are doing all of these cool reforms and be like, oh shit, why aren't we doing that? Oh, it's because we have a tyrannical leader. Let's get fucking rid of him. Oh, it's because we're fed all of this propaganda. Let's not believe it. More people will want to live in those countries or implement those policies. We were talking about the policy tipping point earlier. Wait, what was it? It wasn't tipping point. It is reaching its contagion phase in political diffusion theory. Once again, policies succeed, prove popular, people like them. They spread very, very, very quickly. So that's what we're looking at here. Most people, he says, are not deniers. They're fence sitters, and something like this will easily be enough to shove them over that fence and say, hey, this is a better way to live. This is a better way to do things. So I wanted to end off this video on the fossil fuel conference because it's not a technology, it's not a law, it's not a policy, it's just a huge realignment of most of the global economy that people like me say you gotta have if you're gonna solve this climate problem. It's a global vibe shift. And it's not enough because it's never gonna be enough because climate is a big enough problem.
But you literally use fossil fuels all the time. Your clothes, your stuff, your cars and planes. Aren't you just a giant hypocrite?
Okay, yes, thank you, Strawman. And you get that pretty frequently. You participate in society and yet you dare to critique it? Well, let's see. Let's give you, first of all, the good faith interpretation of this question. Yes, we do have to use fossil fuels in order to do literally anything. The problem that we have with the world is that you need fossil fuels in order to do anything. But like, we don't have to make all of our clothes out of plastic. We don't have to use fossil fuels to get around. That's just how it's set up right now. And, you know, plastic is such a small percentage of overall fossil fuel use that if we're worried about that, like, we've got bigger fish to fry. And if it gets down to the plastic, then we'll have done a great job. But disregarding the plastic part, yes, we need fossil fuels in order to live. And we think that's a real bummer, and somebody should change that. And in fact, we have the technology to change that, so why don't we do it? The answer is because vested interests have a lot of skin in the game for us not to do that. There's a lot of money that gets made off of people having to pay a premium for oil and gas, and that's why we're still stuck doing it. So it's not that, like, we're these big hypocrites. It's that we have to live in society, and we would also like it to change somewhat. And the bad faith response to that argument is, oh yeah, you want me to just, remove myself from society because you need to use fossil fuels in order to do anything here? Yeah, you'd fucking like me to go live in a cave and eat bugs so that you wouldn't have to come up with a decent argument against me. Sounds like you can't. Oh, I drove to the protest? Well, at least I went to the protest. What are you doing to make the world a better place? What are you doing to make it so that we don't have to use fossil fuels for literally everything all the time? Huh? Great question. Hope this helps. There's one more thing I want to talk about because I don't think I've hit 2 hours yet. And it's another environmental crisis that we have already solved in the past, that we solved so good that people now think it's a hoax. Whatever happened to acid rain? They told us acid rain was going to be a big problem. Okay, we solved that one too. That's what happened. We solved it both using activism and through economics. And as the sun slowly sets and my face gets darker and darker and the lighting gets worse and worse, I'm going to tell you how we did it. Now, this is actually lifted from my acid rain video, so if you enjoy this, I don't know, go check that one out because I really get in the weeds. But also it only has like 5,000 views because I really get in the weeds. So I'll start it the same way that I started my other video. The year is 1983, and after buying a house with some spare change you found in the couch, you have decided to head down to the Killarney National Park to take a dip in the lake. But you realize that the water is really clear. No, like it's really clear. There's no algae, no fish, no bugs. This is one of the many lakes in Canada that was rendered completely dead. Your Camaro, because it's the 80s, the paint is starting to wear away a little bit more every time it rains, and out of the park, you notice that the trees have been reduced to black stumps. Around the 70s, scientists started raising the alarm that acid rain was killing forests, emptying lakes, and causing health problems, and also eroding monuments, which, as a profile pic, this would seriously go hard. But anyway, acidic rain was found to be as acidic as lemon juice, and Canadians would bottle the water and send it to American congresspeople being like, see? What caused this problem were two chemicals, nitrogen and sulfur, being polluted and mixing with the water to acidify it. This was mostly made from burning coal and from upstream fossil fuel operations like oil sands. Basically to say, the main acid rain causing emitters were big polluting companies and fossil fuel companies. Shocker, I know. And yet, of course, it's the 80s, so we have Reagan, and the Reagan administration rejected 70 bills aimed at regulating emissions that caused acid rain. But then came the Canadians. Acid rain was once, quote, the single greatest irritant between US-Canadian political relations. Every time a president set foot in Canada, he was greeted with protest signs that said, "Stop acid rain." This is because the pollution would go from the US to Canada, causing acid rain. So any Americans that are upset about the wildfire smoke, I'm sorry, it's payback. Short of building a real tall wall, the only thing Canadians could do about the acid rain destroying their buildings and trees and lakes was protest, and they sure did. Conservative Prime Minister Mulroney's take says, "We wouldn't let go of it. We got in the Americans' face about it at every bilateral meeting until they realized we were serious about it, that we meant it, and we wouldn't go away until we had dealt with it to our satisfaction." So bullied on both sides by Canadian protesters and Canadian politicians who were also bullied by Canadian protesters and voters, in 1990, the US, under H.W. Bush, finally amended the Clean Air Act to put a limit on nitrogen and sulfur emissions, and then signed a bilateral agreement with the US and Canada. Oh, another thing that it's not in here, but that they would do is they would bottle up the water and send it to the American congressmen or senators or whoever and be like, "Look, see? It's acidic. It's a lemonade." The big polluting industries were, of course, furious. This is going to drive up energy prices, and the science isn't settled. And guys, what about jobs? This regulation is communism. And yet, the regulations were still passed. And they were passed using cap and trade, which I'm going to be a bit nerdy about. So stick with me here. Also, I need my hat. Do you get it? It's an emissions cap. So anyways, cap and trade, basically it caps the amount of pollution you're allowed to pollute, and companies are given emissions allowances saying, okay, here's the amount you're allowed to pollute, and if you want to pollute more, you have to buy emissions allowances from other companies. So some companies were able to easily cut their emissions by installing scrubbers, switching to clean energy. And some companies were like, I'm not giving up my pollution. I fucking love polluting. So they would buy the right to pollute from the companies that were able to clean their act up. And if you're lucky, this sort of conversation happens. Hey, I love being a businessman in the 90s. I love using all my emissions allowances to pollute as much as I did last year. But wait a second. If we install smokestack scrubbers and reduce our reliance on coal, we can actually save money and sell our emissions allowances to some other schmuck. And then I can invest all my money into Beanie Babies because it's the 90s. So anyways, this is the point of an emissions cap and trade. It's a very capitalist solution, but I mean, it works. So, what about all of those corporations that complained that it was going to destroy the economy, drive them out of business, skyrocket the price of energy? Well, quote, the Business Roundtable predicted that the new rules would cost $104 billion a year for corporations. It says that it would have led to something like a 50% rise in electricity prices. Except electricity prices didn't rise at all, and they actually fell steadily as the acid rain program went into effect. So, shocker, saying that energy prices are going to go up if we stop polluting, not often true. So, cheaper energy, not much huge expense to businesses, and an entire environmental issue now so irrelevant that people think it was a hoax. All from Canadians bullying Americans and cap and trade. So hopefully the thing that all of these solutions has shown you is that it's not just about saving the planet, it's about saving people. Saving us from forever wars for oil, saving us from tyrannical petrostates, from being price gouged for energy, and also helping people live better in more accessible cities with better food to eat and generally more affordability. It's about helping make up for the injustices that have been perpetrated against Indigenous people and historically colonized countries. It's about solving the rampant inequality that's destroying the world by making energy freely accessible for everybody. And also maybe consuming less so that we can work less, so that we can spend more time, I don't know, hugging trees or something. You decide. Frolicking. So we can spend more time frolicking. So if there is smoke or sweltering heat where you are right now, just remember that this could be the turning point. It's already starting to be the turning point. The last nasty death rattle of a world that was built to support the small few who were able to hoard and burn energy and then hide from accountability on Pedo Island. The old world is dying, the new world is being born, and the monsters are the ones on your feed telling you that it's too late to do anything and we're cooked, but also climate change isn't real, but also you drive a car and take a plane sometimes, so who are you to be an environmentalist? So you can either stay home and be freaked out and hopeless, or you can join all of the people that are using whatever skills and passions that they have to solve this giant problem and create a brand new world. Climate is a big problem, but that means it's also a big enough problem that you probably have a space somewhere in it, that someone needs something that you know how to do. You can help people to drive less and bike more and help put up solar panels or help people eat less meat or buy less useless plastic garbage. You can join the picket line or the protest or the blockade in front of the latest stupid, too late to be useful, too expensive pipeline that they're building for some reason. Or you can tell your city that you want legal balcony solar. Or you could help somebody who's not being paid off by big oil to run for office and help them win. There's so much you can do. I will just give you a couple pointers for how to get started. I mostly know about the US and Canada, but I'm sure there's something to do wherever you are. The activist groups that I like are here in Canada. What are we called again? Here in Canada, we have Common Horizons. In the US, we have Climate Change Makers, Sunrise Movement if you're younger, and Third Act if you're older, we'll say. But hopefully one of those sections resonated with you, and it's something that you want to get involved with. Thank you for joining me for 2 hours straight of climate solutions. This video has been sponsored by being a little bit of a sanctimonious know-it-all, you know? Sometimes you gotta be a little bit preachy. Sometimes you gotta preach to the choir because the choir don't know what to do. This video was sponsored by doing your best. This video was sponsored by, did you know that if you get involved or do anything substantial for the climate, it decreases your climate anxiety by a lot? Get involved. And this video was sponsored by my patrons. And, this video took a lot of work and effort and research, so please like and subscribe. It would help. And if you have a friend who's maybe got a lot of climate anxiety, or they're like, we're cooked, there's nothing we can do, or if they're sounding like my boy Strawman, send this video to them.